Well, truly the honor is mine, and so I'd like to thank Hanko for inviting me back. I gave one of these approximately 10, 12 years ago on another area of research, and so I'm thankful for the opportunity to come back and talk a little bit about some of the newer things that we've been doing and some of the an area of research that we've gotten into roughly over the last 10 years or so. So if we look at a couple of these cartoons, I don't know if you can read them from the back, but I'll just point you to this middle one here of a bunch of dinosaurs and say, and the caption says, "The picture's pretty bleak, gentlemen. The world's climates are changing, the mammals are taking over," that would be us, or actually not us, but pretty close to us, "and we all have the brain of about the size of a walnut." I'll come back to that later on in the talk. But yes, we're going to talk about climate change and coastal marshes, and so here's a nice picture of a set of coastal marshes. This is from Hammonasset Beach. This is Long Island Sound over here. But before going on, I'd like to really thank and acknowledge the folks that really did a lot of the work that went into the research that I'm going to talk about and some of the findings that we have. And so this is really brought to you by a large collaboration of both undergraduate and graduate students. And a number of them are pictured here. The funding has come partially through the UNH SURF program for the students that did SURF projects over the summer, also a University Research Scholar program, and also a program called, from the National Science Foundation called GeoPath. So undergraduate and graduate students, and a number of these graduate students, the ones that are asterisked here, are doing have done marsh-related research. Some of them are here today. Thank you for coming, and and thank you for your efforts. So really, this talk is a very much so a collaboration. Okay, so what is going to be the game plan this afternoon? I'm going to give a couple of quick overviews. Some of you are in the sciences. Looks as though potentially maybe some of you are not. So I'm going to give a couple of quick overviews. And if you have a question, just don't be afraid to say, "Hey, wait a minute, can you explain that better?" But I'm going to give a couple of quick overviews about salt marshes in general, about climate change in general, and then we're going to talk about changes that have taken place on New England salt marshes, both in a historical context, some of the current patterns of change that we see now, and then use that as a backdrop to look at some of the responses of salt marsh fauna to these changes. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about losses and gains. Losses of salt marshes and gains of salt marshes and other kinds of habitats as climate change affects these coastal environments. And then finally, I'm going to wrap it up and talk a little bit about some of the challenges that we face moving forward in the face of climate change and the kinds of environmental alterations that are occurring with regards to things like shoreline protection and management in what really is a time of environmental uncertainty. Okay, salt marshes, a general overview. Salt marshes, of course, are coastal environments, and what's unique about them is that they have a very, very strong gradient based on elevation and tidal influx. And so if we look at a cross-section of a tidal salt marsh, it can be divided into three basic areas. A low marsh, which is flooded twice a day by high tides, at least in these areas. A high marsh, which is flooded occasionally during monthly high tides, or what we call spring tides, and also during storms. And then the marsh border, which can occasionally on very, very, very high tides be flooded and can also receive salt water during times of storms. And so in this photo over here, this is the low marsh. We have a very extensive high marsh in this photo, and up here is that upland border or marsh border, or the upland transition as we might call it. And there are certain kinds of plant species and animal species, as I'll point out later, that occupy these zones. And I'll just mention a couple of them because their names will be coming up again during the talk. One of them is Spartina alterniflora. It's a very tall grass, and that dominates the lower portion of the low marsh. And then Spartina patens, which dominates much of the high marsh. It's a related plant, but it's much shorter in stature, if you will. And then in areas that are these pans, which are depressions in the marsh that get a little saltier, we have something called short Spartina alterniflora, and it's short because it's short. And it's actually the same species, but it's a different ecotype. So those will become players. Now, salt marshes, again, are created. They expand, they're maintained, they're lost, they're gained based on an interplay between how much sediment is coming into an coastal area, the sea level at the time and sea level rise, and also the effects of various other environmental factors on plant growth and plant decomposition. So if there's a lot of sediment coming in, the plants are going to trap that sediment and the marsh is going to build up. And it may build up fast enough to either exceed sea level rise, in which case we get the development of more high marsh and potentially upland transition. But if that delivery and accretion of sediments onto the marsh surface is not high enough, and it can't keep up in equilibrium with sea level rise, the marsh starts flooding and changes in the structure of the marsh with regards to the kinds of plants that we see, and as we'll see, animals can start taking place. And so there's this very complex, potentially complex interaction between these factors, which very much controls what the dynamics of salt marshes. Okay, climate change. Well, we're all familiar with climate change, and there are two primary components of that I'd like to mention. One is temperature. And if we look at graphs of global temperature change, this is in degrees Fahrenheit, from the 1900s till about the present, we see that the observations show that, of course, we have a warming planet. If we look at natural factors only that may explain that, we see that they kind of fluctuate around, and they don't necessarily explain the actual observations. But if we take into account various natural and the human factors, then those together can help explain these observations of a growing planet, a warming planet. The other part of this is these temperature anomalies. And so every summer we have some really, really warm days and we have somewhat cooler days. But between 1951 and 1980, if you look at the data, you can kind of draw this graph. And here is a zero, sort of average summer temperature. And these are the distribution of anomalies for colder and warmer. And if we go into 1981 to 91, 91 to 2000, through these decades, we see that by 2011, the decade that just passed, that this has shifted considerably into much, much higher temperatures. And so summertime temperatures are getting much warmer. We have many more anomalous days of high temperature. Okay, so we have increasing temperature, and also we have increasing sea level rise, which is an important parameter, as I mentioned. And so if we go back to 1700 and look at sea level records of various kinds, we see that there is, as we move into the 1900s and 2000s, a sharp increase in global sea level. And based on certain kinds of projections, we could see that it's going to be quite a bit. This is now up to about 1 meter or about over 0.6 meters, depending on the level of emissions that may be affecting global climate. Now, sea level rise is affected by a number of factors. It's affected by the ocean warming. It's affected by what's called subsidence, where continents actually kind of drop down. So all of these things are playing into sea level rise. But the predictions are such that we are going to see a continuation of sea level rise rise. And so that part of the dynamic of marsh growth, loss, maintenance is going to be shifting sort of the balance towards, okay, more flooding. All right. So let's move on to part 2 and talk about some of the changes that have occurred on New England salt marshes. And first of all, we have to consider historical changes. The New England landscape has been a very much changing landscape over the last 400 years. Prior to colonial settlement, it wasn't a vast, pristine woodland. The indigenous population was very much using the landscape. There was slash and burn. There were areas that were being cultivated for meadowland. So it wasn't a vast forest, but it was pretty much forested. Starting in 1700, with an increase in the number of colonists, we see a progression from a pretty much forested area to a less forested area, where by 1830, basically much of the land was deforested, particularly in areas like Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts, and portions of New Hampshire. Indeed, in 1830, Connecticut was 70% unforested. And so if you drive around outside and just flip the switch and imagine all that forest you see being farmland, that's what it was like in 1830. So what was going on? Well, in terms of marsh dynamics, we were cutting down the forests, we were mobilizing a lot of sediment. That sediment went into the rivers, went all downstream, and started collecting and affecting the coastal areas. And indeed, recent research has suggested that that transport of huge amounts of sediment caused the expansion of salt marshes in the New England area. So over here is a study that comes from Kerwin et al. In 2011, and what they did is they took samples down into the sediment, and they were able to look at the different layers of sediment and determine where they came from and at what time they were deposited. And what they found was that a portion of the marsh, shown here in blue, was formed pre-colonial times. But large sections, shown here in gray, were actually formed post-European settlement. And so this influx of sediment was now building up these marshes around, on New England coastlines. So what might have they looked like, these marshes at this time? Well, didn't have any photography. There weren't a lot of ecologists around at that time. So what do we turn to? Well, what we can turn to is actually art. And looked at, now, yes, artists do have, some play in what they're seeing and what they're painting. But we can use them to kind of see, well, what were these environments like? And try to gather from them some information along those lines. Now, does anybody recognize this picture here, where this comes from? We could, if we had time, go to the window there and look out. That's West Rock. And that's West Rock, and this is the West River. And so this is what out there looked like back in 1849, as depicted by Frederick Edwin Church, who's a famous American landscape artist of the period. And for our purposes here, besides it being a really nice painting, is that here is the sort of the estuary snaking in over here, and these guys are out there haying the marsh, and so they've cut down and made these bundles of salt. Spartina patens is sometimes referred to as salt marsh hay, and so they're haying the marsh, and they have this little cart out here, and they're going to take it away and put it on their gardens. Likewise, if we look at another painting by Martin Johnson Heade, this is Salt Marsh in Southport, Connecticut, painted sometime between 1862 and 1863. And what we can see, again, are cows grazing out on the salt marshes. This is Long Island Sound over in the background, and stacks of hay. And if we even take, he did a lot of salt marsh paintings at this time. This is from Rhode Island. Again, haying, big bundles of hay up on the salt marsh. And so that leads us then to be able to say that in the early 1800s, in the mid 1800s, we had large expanses of high marsh because they were actually farming these areas and had animals on them. And so they were dry. These areas of high marsh were likely very, very dry. And so back to our little cartoon. So this area, this high marsh, was expanding and increasing in height, and as such was probably not being affected a lot by tidal inundation, except perhaps during very large storms and very high spring tides at the full moon. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. And so what happens next in this historical context? Well, people leave the farms, and where do they go? The Industrial Revolution starts, and they leave farms to start to work in the mills and in the urban areas. And in order to power those mills, what do they start doing? They start building a lot of dams. And indeed, this is a picture, each one of these dots represents a dam in Connecticut. There are a lot of dams in Connecticut. Damn, huh? And so, and what do dams do? They collect sediment behind them. So now all of a sudden the sediment supply to the coast is diminished as we have this shift in the going from an agrarian state to an industrialized kind of economy. And as such, less sediment is being delivered into the coastal area, and but sea level is starting to creep up at that time. So about 1920 or 1930, ecologists finally started looking at salt marshes, and the kind of salt marshes that they found were these salt marshes that I just depicted in the previous slide. Our own work at Bonka Marsh over in Stony Creek in Branford, Connecticut, which is, I don't know if you can see it very well, it's this red circle over here, started about in the late 1990s. And it was about this time that coastal ecologists were picking up very interesting changes in salt marsh systems, both in Connecticut, Cape Cod, and other portions of New England. And so here's some of our first initial work in the summer of 1997. A couple of grad students doing elevations to look at the elevation of the marsh and the kinds of plants that there were. But in October 2000, we found this huge dieback occurring. And increased erosion in the front of the marsh over here. That had been occurring, but it really accelerated by this time. And so, of course, you say, well, what's up with that? And we started looking at some of these processes and some of the conditions on the marsh. Now, with regards to that front marsh erosion, we started putting in some markers, and this is a marker that was put in kind of just a PVC pipe at a certain distance from the shore. At this point, it was 15.2 meters from where this guy over here is standing. And if we follow the progression over time, this is in 2004. We could see a little bit of erosion going on over here, but by 2006, we see that this whole area has pretty much disappeared. And then here's the pipe over here in 2009. There's actually no more marsh around it. And by 2012, it's somewhere blocked by this person measuring the edge of the marsh using a GPS. And so from these visual data and also some measurements, we found out that the marsh was being lost at about 2.5 meters per year. Which is a pretty good rate, and these are just pictures of that marsh falling in. And so increased tidal inundation is likely stressing the plants that are living on the front part of this marsh. There's nothing to bind the sediment, and so we get this increased what's called calving, or calving, these chunks falling off. There's a couple of other hydrologic factors that come into play to this, but I'll not mention them at this point. So we have this front marsh erosion, and so we're measuring it directly, but we also wanted to say, well, how about going back? And so we looked at aerial photographs, historical aerial photographs. And this is that area of the marsh that I just showed you pictures of. This is a infrared photo, that's why it's red, and this shoreline is in 2010. In 1934, Connecticut flew its first set of aerial photographs to map the state. And in 1934, the shoreline was out here. In 1986, the shoreline edge of the marsh was here, and then in 2000 it was here. So we can see a very significant reduction in the low marsh. In this area. Now, just north of this is this area over here. And so we used image analysis and a geographic information system to look at different kinds of plants. So each of these colors represent a different kind of plant. The dark green SP, that's that high marsh plant that I was talking to you about. So much of this area had high marsh in it, but some of it was actually upland, as evidenced by these stumps that are still on the marsh from when it used to be upland, where there used to be trees there. By 1986, all of this upland had converted to marsh, and much of this Spartina patens had already declined. And by 2010, we see very little true sort of Spartina patens high marsh, as shown by these dark green colors, and a lot more mix of this short Spartina alterniflora that occurs when there is increasing tidal inundation, more salt, and more stress on certain kinds of plants. So we see this transitioning that has occurred very, very rapidly during the 1900s and into the early 2000s. So what do we have going on? So we have this extensive high marsh dominated by Spartina patens that probably looks something like this. This is a picture from Cape Cod, but we don't have any pictures from the 70s or the 30s, but although I'm going to the Historical Society to see if we can find some in Stony Creek. But anyhow, so it looks something like this to what now looks like this. And so we have this, instead of having this broad, almost uniculture of Spartina patens, we have a mix, a very complex mosaic of short Spartina alterniflora. This over here is one of the remnant Spartina patens. This is a close-up of that. We can see a lot of bare areas, and this is what it sort of looks like on the ground. All right, so we've had this very significant change from a habitat that's like this to a habitat that's much more variable and much more complex in certain ways. And so we've done a little bit of research to try to substantiate some of these changes. We've used aerial photographs to try to pick off the ponds and the pools that are these little black areas over here over time. So this is an aerial photograph from 1974. This is an aerial photograph from 2010. And indeed, there has been a significant increase in the number of ponds that are found in this portion of one of our study areas, going from about, in this case, about 100, close to 150 to about 300, almost a doubling in the number of ponds. An indication that the marsh surface is getting wetter. And indeed, the pond habitats are very distinct habitats. They provide habitat for certain kinds of organisms, but not for other kinds of organisms. So you might anticipate that there's some shifts in the kinds of organisms that we find across the marsh. But you know, these ponds and bare areas are really hard to see in these high altitude aerial photographs. So we started playing around with some low-level aerial imagery. Specifically, we started off with cameras hooked up onto kites, and we would fly the kites over the marsh and take a whole bunch of pictures. This is one of those pictures from the kite. And we also started playing around with a balloon. And so we would fill the balloon with helium, it'd go up and we'd take a whole bunch of pictures. And so the idea is to be able to have these low-level aerial imagery which are much more clear in terms of the kinds of habitat changes that we're trying to track. And so to give you just, so here's a person here, here's a person here. That's about 20 meters or so, 20 or 30 meters from about here to about here. And so we're using aerial photographs such as this. And so we have a photograph like this. We can run it through what's called an image analysis system, which is, so with the aid of a computer, we can isolate the pixel signature of these kinds of pools and ponds, as shown here. We clean it up a little bit, and we can start actually quantifying how many kinds, how many patches are there, what's their average size, what is the range of sizes, and then we can go back, get images from the same area. I believe this one was taken in 2011, and so we can go back through the years and see in a very detailed way, to what extent is this phenomenon occurring. But, and so we're following specific study areas within the marsh. But, it got really hard waiting for nice windy days for the kite or nice calm days for the balloon, right? We got every day in between, it seemed. So we went with we're now using a drone or a quadcopter, in this case, something called the DJI Vision 2 Plus. This is us, a number of us deploying that. And we get, again, similar kinds of images, but now we can get them a lot more regularly. We're not so tied up into the weather. The vagaries of the weather. And again, we can take an image such as this, run it through an image analysis, and look at and quantify the amount of bare area. So for example, in this 10 by 10 meter area, there's about 14% of the total area is actually bare, even though it doesn't quite look as though there's that much there. And a lot of it is in areas of very sparse vegetation. That's going to make a difference in terms of the ability of the marsh to trap more sediment and keep itself going, and also the kinds of organisms that are going to be running around and making use of the marsh. Okay, so let's do a video interlude to give you an idea of see if I can pull this off. What do I do here? Oh, here we go. Is it going? No. Back. Sorry. I knew I shouldn't have tried so much technology. Why isn't this going? Here we go. Is it moving? All right, good. I thought it would be move faster. But anyhow, so this is a movie taken from our quadcopter to give you an idea of the nature of the marsh. And so you could see there's quite a few these little channels and rivulets. These are different densities of the Spartina. This is the low marsh in through here. That's made up of the Spartina patens. And so again, that's so this is the low marsh. This is the high marsh that's now being converted to the short Spartina patens. We're looking out on Long Island Sound. This over here is one of the remnant patches of Spartina patens. This is a baseball field. And so you could see that the marsh is very, very heterogeneous. It's a mosaic of many different kind of patch types. Not many of them. Here's a couple of more of these Spartina patens. This is the grass that dominated that marsh back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, but it's changed quite rapidly since then. And you can see, so it gives you an idea of just the complexity of the structure of the marsh at this time. Anyhow, okay. So what kind of effects does that have on the fauna? So we see this significant erosion. We see these shifts in the vegetative patch structure. So we might ask, how are the fauna responding to such changes? Well, we primarily have been looking at two species. One, fiddler crab, something called yucca, and they're typically found in the low marsh. Okay, so we have this organism that's typically found in the low marsh that we look at. And then we're looking at this little snail. It's very small. You know, yes, that's one of those twirly things from a maple. And so here's the snail, something called Melampus bidentatus, which is typically found in high marshes and mostly in Spartina patens, according to the literature. So how are they responding? And we're sort of using these as the canaries in the coal mine, so to speak, if you will. We're also looking at some other species, which I'll mention in a moment. But so we've done some work on this Euca pugnax, and it is primarily, as I said, found in the low marsh. And so if you just look at this, let's look at this middle graph over here. And so this is bare area and Spartina alterniflora, and this is just the number of burrows of this guy. And yes, we do find them primarily in these low marsh areas. However, in our study, we found relatively high numbers of burrows also up on the high marsh now. And so the idea is that these guys are actually expanding their use of the marsh. So rather than just being in the low marsh, right along the water's edge, because of increasing tidal influx and the marsh getting wetter, they're actually expanding up into the marsh. All right, so in this case, at least, we see that. And indeed, some of them have been found even in the upland transition. And indeed, a number of the people that live around the marsh have noted that they're in their lawns now. So they've kind of crawled up into the lawns and they're burrowing into the lawns. So, and so I said, well, do you get tides up there? I said, oh yeah, we do every once in a while. So these guys are really expanding quite a bit. But how typical is this response? So an undergrad student, Sam Gurr, a couple of years ago did a summer research project, and we drove around the coast and we looked at how typical this was along the Connecticut coast. And in this case, we're actually looking at the number of crabs that we find, not just their burrows. And what we found is that in areas in the eastern portion of the Sound where the tidal range is lower, so it's not being affected as much by tidal inundation, we didn't find a lot of crabs up on the high marsh. But in areas in the central portion of Connecticut where tidal inundation, it's a much greater tidal range in this end of the state, we see significant numbers of crabs up in the high marsh. So the level of tidal inundation appears to be controlling the amount, the degree to which these crabs are showing what we refer to as a habitat expansion. They're actually using more territory now for themselves. There's some other interesting things that were done. We did some work with Dr. Kelly actually one summer to see how much fidelity they have and all that. And so there's some very, very interesting patterns that they're showing. All right, how about this Melampus species? Well, again, they're pretty small, and we've looked at their abundance in these different kinds of vegetation, and we have found some shifts in some differences in abundance. And so, for example, this is the abundance in short alterniflora seems to be higher, at least in this area. Lower in these other, remnants of Spartina patens, the typical high marsh species. But in other areas, the differences aren't so much. So here it's kind of a mixed bag. And indeed, the snails look to be holding their own with regards to this shift in the structure of the marsh. However, that only occurs to a certain degree. If we go and look at this portion of the marsh that I talked about, which was eroding, there's very much increased tidal flooding in this area, and in this back area, there's less tidal flooding. And if we look at the data, we see that the Banca back, what we call Banca back, it's called the Banca Marsh because Peter Banca and his family donated it to the university. About that, well, we started looking at this place shortly thereafter. But anyhow, the abundances in this area, so these blue bars, are always higher than in these lower areas. And so we were wondering about that. And so I had an undergrad student, Erin Kelly, who's doing her master's degree out in Hawaii now, do what's called a caging experiment. And so what she did, she painted the snails with nail polish to mark them. I forget what the actual color, it was kind of this really nice blue. And they so we can track them. And she put some in cages, some in what we call cage controls, and some in uncaged areas. She put these cages out here and out here, and it's known that these small fish, Fundulus and other fish, actually do eat them. And so the hypothesis is that with increased flooding, there's more exposure to fish predators than there is back here with less flooding. And indeed, that was borne out by the experiment. If we look at these big blue bars, is 100% survivorship in the caged area, so we didn't, in the cages, so we didn't lose any there. But the predation rates in the banca front, in this case, translated into survivorship, the survivorship was much, much lower than we found in banca back. And so with increased flooding, tidal flooding, the suggestion is that you have more fish coming on, they probably have longer to feed, and as such, they're really knocking the population down, whereas in areas that are having less flooding, that effect is not as great. So temperature comes into play as well. Some experiments that Aaron did as well looked at temperature and looked at survivorship at 30, 35, and 40 degrees of the snail over about a 6-hour period, which is kind of a low tide period. What she found was that she had these plates with dry mud, no mud, and wet mud. And in 30 and 35 degrees centigrade, which is pretty warm, there was basically 100% mortality in all cases except when there was wet mud. But at 40 degrees, even the wet mud guys were lost. And so 40 degrees centigrade seems to be that upper lethal temperature for these snails. The other interesting thing was that the survivors, which were taken out from the wet mud, had very low activity for the survivors in 30 and 35. At 30 degrees, they kind of were, many of them were active right away. The ones that were at 35, they really didn't get going until some water was added, until they kind of rehydrate. So what did everybody say? You got to hydrate, right? So that was an interesting result. So what does that mean? Well, we have been also tracking temperature. So we have these little temperature sensors that we put out there. And we put them out all over the place, and then they run. They can run for almost 6 months at a time, so they just keep logging temperature. And so then we get back the sensors and we look at the temperature patterns. And one of the things that we found was that there are habitats within the marsh that get, well, first of all, our highest temperature that we found was 51 degrees centigrade on the marsh, which is more than halfway to boiling. That's about 124 degrees Fahrenheit. So it can get very, very warm on the marsh. And during certain periods of time, there are over 3 hours where, 3+ hours where the temperature gets above 35 degrees centigrade and also above 40 degrees centigrade. So these organisms are being potentially stressed by increasing temperatures in their habitat over these summer months, particularly at very low tide periods when there's no or very little tidal inundation over their habitats. So we can kind of pull all that data together and kind of make a possible projection of the future with regards to Melampus. Now, Melampus is actually a very important organism on the marsh. It's a detritivore. It eats a lot of the plant dead material, and so it stimulates bacterial activity. It itself is a organism that's eaten by a number of different kinds of species, including the fish, besides the fish. And so it's kind of a key species in the ecosystem. And so in the pre-change, well, what we'll call the pre-change marshes, the abundances of Melampus were very, very high in these high marshes that were dominated by Spartina patens. That's that big, thick arrow. And the abundances were existing probably, but much lower in the short Spartina alterniflora areas. At the present time, it looks as though their abundances are about the same. in these areas. But if you've noticed in this little cartoon that we've drawn, the short Spartina alterniflora is kind of increasing in terms of the area that it's covering relative to the Spartina patens. In the not too distant future, if that trend continues, and we also have increases, these little guys here are bare areas. And so if we have increases in bare areas, which we are seeing, and ponds, then what we're predicting is a shift where there's going to be many, many more, much higher abundances of Melampus in this short Spartina alterniflora and lower abundances, much lower abundances potentially in the Spartina patens. And in the distant future, what may happen is that indeed we're going to have very low abundances across the marsh in terms of the short Spartina, whatever's left of that high marsh that is dominated by this Spartina patens, as shown by these smaller arrows. And if indeed the marsh can migrate up into the upland, which I'll talk about in a minute, then the highest abundances may actually be found there. And so here we have a shifting of habitat type, potentially, at least for this species. Okay. There are a couple of other players in this that I'll mention briefly. One of them is what's called the purple marsh crab, Sesarma reticulatum. And over the last decade or so, it has been responsible for the denudation, the devegetation of many of these lower areas of the marsh. And so here's a picture of this marsh in 2008. You can see there's a lot of grass here. This area is fully vegetated. In 2013, that grass basically has been mowed down by this crab down to this area. I don't think it's just the crab. It may also have to do with some stresses to the plants, but basically these areas are being mowed down by this crab. So that's another factor that's coming into play. The reasons for that, if we have a little bit of time, somebody asked me, I can get into it, but it may have to do with overfishing, at least as suggested by some. I think it actually has to do more with temperature. But anyhow, there are these other crabs that are players in the kinds of changes that we're seeing. And how about the fish? Well, yeah, the fish can also, they're not so much causing the changes, but they may be important. Their responses to the changes may be important. As I mentioned earlier, marshes are very important nurseries for a variety of fish, and there are a variety of fish that are important in coastal food webs that basically live on the marsh. And so we have these transients that come in, feed on them, and so on and so forth. And so the question is, how are these fish responding? So we've started to study this, some of this in conjunction with Dr. Kelly, where we're looking at and we're using several kinds of traps. We're using these passive traps. We just recently tried these square traps. This is a GoPro down over here where we're trying to videotape what's coming in and out. Now the marsh at low tide looks like this, but at high tide it looks like this. It becomes this shallow, very high tides, it becomes this very shallow lake, and there's a lot of stuff that comes in. So we're starting to look at that. And we have some initial data that looks at differences between areas that are along the edges of the creeks and further up on the marsh to see if there are differences in the uses of those. For the sake of time, I do have another little video of fish, but if we have time, I'll throw that on later. Okay. So what is that all leading to? Well, we can consider losses and gains in our systems. And in Connecticut and other areas, we have been losing salt marsh as depicted over here. So this is an area called Canfield Cove, which is around Norwalk. Here's the marsh. The red area is the vegetated area. And we can see this is in 1974. This is in 2000. Much of that area has been lost. And so we've lost a lot of low marsh. We've gained a bit of tidal flat, so we're kind of converting to tidal flat. But the high marsh areas seem to be holding their own, at least for now. And so we do have a number of areas where we have what's called marsh drowning, and have lost the marshes. We're also potentially going to have some gains in marsh. As the tide creeps up, we're going to have a phenomenon called a marine transgression. And the marsh is going to try to make its way up into upland areas. And so this is an area out in eastern Connecticut where the marsh is kind of creeping up. We can see these trees have died out. We have some marsh plants that are kind of moving up into this area. So we call this marine transgression. And there are areas, this is a salt marsh in Old Saybrook, Connecticut, and we could see that we've developed right to the edge of the marsh. It's nice to live on the marsh, right? You see a lot of nice birds, and you can actually have a little dock and make your way out into Long Island Sound, and so on and so forth. But these are the kinds of areas where it's, it's pretty, the grade is not too great, and the tide is going to creep up, creep up, creep up. And so these are the kinds of areas that we're going to get some of this marine transgression, this upland migration of the marshes. Although I don't think these guys are going to be really happy about having fiddler crabs all over their lawns pretty soon. However, that transgression can occur everywhere. There's this phenomenon called coastal squeeze, and if we go back to the Banca marshes that we're looking at, there's a couple of examples of potential sources of coastal squeeze. This right here is the railroad, that's Amtrak. And that basically forms a dike. So the water comes in and it just piles up here because it has no place to go. This is an old trolley line, which is used now for recreation. It too acts as kind of a dike, so the water can't go anywhere. And so these kinds of man-made structures can act to sort of squeeze the water into a particular area. There are also natural formations, particularly in New England. Our marshes are only about 8,000 to 10,000 years old. Why? Because it was glaciated, up until about 20,000 years ago, roughly, and so then we had the retreat of the glaciers, and what was left are a lot of these headlands of stone, and so these headlands go out into Long Island Sound, and the marshes form between them. And they have a very high elevation. They're made out of rock, so the water can't go anywhere. And so they are acting also to produce this coastal squeeze. Okay, so what are the prospects and challenges as we move into the future? Well, we have a number of models that have been created to look at, okay, what's going to happen? And basically these models predict roughly what's shown here on this graph. And so if we look at the amount of regularly flooded marsh, that's that low marsh that I was talking to you about, relative to the amount of sea level rise that we may get by 2100, we see that if we get around, depending, if we get more sea level rise, we're going to get more of these low marshes being created. And we're going to get a real decline in the irregularly flooded marsh, that high marsh area that I was talking to you about. And so we're going to get big conversion from basically a mixed bag to primarily dominated by what's called this low marsh area. And depending on the amount of sea level rise we have, we then can get also increases of tidal flat. And that's kind of depicted here in this model for Clinton, Connecticut. So this is an irregularly flooded marsh over here at 2010, and we can see that with 1 meter of SLR sea level rise, it comes into a regularly flooded area, and actually if we have up to 1.7 meters, it becomes basically a pond, a coastal embayment. So that's sort of the prospects. And in terms of the challenges, well, with increasing sea level rise, bigger storms, more damage to the coastline, there are another number of actions that can be taken. The do nothing action, you can move the houses back, move them up. You can design them appropriately. With regards to the wetlands and the marshes themselves, you can create or maintain buffer marshes. You can create or restore the wetlands. You can add things like riprap. You can build a seawall. All of these are, or the do-nothing option results in rebuild after damage, and while that cost is low, that cost can be very, very high. And so these are some of the options that are available. And I'd like just to mention very quickly some of the ones that are a little bit, I think, more reasonable and hopefully approachable. One of them is restoration. We can actually restore marshes, and there are a number of very large projects that are being done to try to restore lost marshes. This is in Jamaica Bay on the south shore of Long Island, and they have a number of projects that where they're restoring the marshes. This is an aerial view of the marsh being restored. And so they have these fences, they have these big plugs of grass that they put in, but this needs lots of sediment. And where they're getting their sediment from dredging channels in Great South Bay. So they have a supply of sediment. Something like that may not be an option for Long Island Sound because we just don't have that source of sediment. And so we have to look potentially at other options. And one of them is to regain marshes that have been affected by invasive species. In this case, this common reed, Phragmites. And so there are a number of restoration activities that are trying to rid the marshes of these very tall reeds and convert it into habitat that is more akin to a sort of typical high marsh. The other restoration that's going on and has been pretty effective is putting in what are called self-regulating tide gates. A lot of areas have been blocked off by tide gates or these dikes and dams that I've been talking to you about, and as such, salt water isn't coming into those areas, so the marshes become more like this as opposed to a regular marsh. And so self-regulating tide gates are such that they will open on regular tides. If there's a storm, they'll close, so those upper areas won't get flooded if indeed there's development around those areas. So that's the kind of, another type of restoration that's occurring. The other kind of approach is to use what are called living shorelines. And what that entails is using various kinds of materials to actually buffer wave action and increases of inundation on marshes. In this case, this is a riprap that's been created by stone and also bags of oyster shell. And so the idea here is to start protecting the fronts of the marshes with these natural materials. Those natural materials provide habitat for a variety of organisms as well, but they also reduce wave action and erosion onto the marsh itself. And so this is just a sort of a man-made sill, if you will, that is going to protect it against storm damage and so on. And this is a group of people developing one of these living shorelines. These are bags of oyster shells, and you can use various other kinds of wood materials or wood-like materials in these logs that are created, and you place these logs, and eventually they'll get colonized and so on and so forth. So there's a number of options, restoration options, that are available for increasing our inventory of marshes and also potentially protecting them for the kinds of changes that we've been talking about. So what are the prospects? Well, one of the critical aspects of this is uncertainty. And so, you know, we have an initial condition. We kind of have an idea what the marshes are like now. I'll mention something about that in a minute. And so we can analyze them. And there are a number of pathways that we can lead to with regards to having some kind of forecast of where they're going to be. And so this is the forecast uncertainty. And then there's sort of the climatology that surrounds that. And then maybe that climatology may change a bit as we're going down this pathway. So there is uncertainty in what may happen. But I do think we seem to be on a specific trajectory with with regards to the nature of our salt marshes. And so that kind of leads us into the societal question of and need. There needs to be a will of commitment under such uncertainty, and that's a difficult thing to do. I think we all recognize that. And this is a sculpture that I particularly liked, and I kind of changed the caption from the first cartoon I showed you to "The situation looks pretty bleak. The climate, they say, is changing. We have brains the size of cantaloupes, but we still can't figure out why we're neck deep in water." This is actually politicians discussing global warming. And so we have to kind of get away from that. Hopefully we can shift away from that kind of thinking. And we do recognize that coastal conservation and planning is a very, very complex endeavor. There's all kinds of moving parts that go every which way, and you got to figure out, okay, how is this all going to work out? So eventually, all right, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to get this kind of data, and so on and so forth, so that eventually, somebody's going to package it and give it to somebody, and hopefully without dropping the ball. But anyhow. So there are a number of issues. So it's very complex, and there are a number of sort of this overarching issues that we have to deal with. One is ecological knowledge of these trajectories of the salt marshes and the variation within. I've showed you some examples from marshes that we've been working on, but if we did sort of a full inventory, we would see slight deviations from one system to the other. The systems up in New Hampshire are slightly different than the ones in Maine, than the ones on Cape Cod. They're all sharing certain commonalities, but if you want to manage systems on a local level, you really have to have that local level appreciation of what's going on these marshes for this particular region. I've mentioned the socio-political hurdles, particularly in accepting uncertainty, and hopefully that could lead to effective management of protection of these salt marsh systems. Now, I'm kind of an optimist, and so I think this can be done as we move through the next couple of decades. But hey, I'm an optimist. But thanks very much. Questions? Yes?
So when you were showing us the art of the marshes in the past, you mentioned how the hay would be cut down to some degree. Was there any reason why the hay was cut? Was it because of actual feeding, or was it because they wanted to expand the land that they had? They
actually took the hay and would feed it to their livestock, and they would also use it as fertilizer in gardens for agriculture.
So would that actually help the marshes at all, or would it still continue to destroy them?
Well, the marsh plants actually senesce at the end of winter. Okay, and so like grasses, they will actually die back to their roots, and so cutting them early, as long as they seed it out and were able to maintain themselves, and so clearly they were doing this for a while, so it doesn't look as though it had a negative effect on the marshes. Although there are some marshes where, if we take aerial photographs, we still see, well, first of all, we still have stone walls in marshes. We have areas where we could tell livestock were on this circular path, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, in the back.
Earlier, before you were talking about the area of land that was stuck between the Amtrak line and the trolley line.
Yeah.
Was that the East Haven Trolley Museum line?
That used to be the Shoreline Trolley, and the East Haven Trolley Line Museum that was part of that system. Yes.
Because the reason why I ask is because I went there a few years ago, and when we were on the ride, they stopped at one point and said that because of stuff that was going on with the marsh, it was unsafe to proceed with the trains. And my thought was, is something like weather affecting that? Like, if say we get weather that surges water in, and it goes over the tracks, or it pushes the water.
You can get, with increasing inundation, if the weather's right, you can get surges of water over the tracks. Could have been undercutting the tracks. That's by the Farm River. That's kind of, that area is west of what I was showing you.
I kind of see how they're integrated with the track and the natural marsh. It's just, I'm wondering whether or not the tracks being there are harming the area that's in between the two tracks.
Well, yeah, well, they are because they act as dikes, and water comes in and has no place to spread. So if it has no place to spread, it's actually higher now on the marsh for a longer period of time, thereby potentially stressing the plants more because of that. Yes?
Yeah, I live on the Connecticut River in Old Lyme, and I was just curious, do you notice the same type of changes in bodies of fresh water as you do in like salt water in the Sound, or is that unique to salt water?
Well, Old Lyme is in Lyme.
Old Lyme.
Old Lyme. Well, Old Lyme is right on the river, and so that's sort of estuarine-like.
Okay.
All right, and so it's not really fresh. I mean, yes, you have the Connecticut River, the top layers of the river are fresh water, but there are extensive marshes in that lower portion of the Connecticut River, and there are similar kinds of changes going on there. Those systems were dominated by that tall reed, Phragmites, in a lot of places, and they've been trying to cut that back, but there are similar changes that are going on because of increased tidal inundation, yeah. Yes?
Another question. Looking at like current weather and how there's been some reports of possibly another hurricane or storm coming up the coast, how do those affect the marshes? Are those beneficial because they push everything in, or is it harming the marshes more?
Well, yes. The answer is yes. And so in the sense that generally storms will have a lot of sediment, if they're churning up the bottom, and they're going to have a lot of sediment in them. And so they can deliver large amounts of sediment onto the marsh surface. And so if the marsh surface is sediment starved, that could have a beneficial effect. However, depending on the exposure of the marsh, so that one area that I showed you that was being eroded, with increasing tidal action, that could really cause a lot more erosion than regular tidal action occurs. And so in one storm event, we may lose a meter of marsh, whereas it may take a full year to lose about that much or a little bit more. And so the effects of storms can be both positive and negative, depending again on what marsh you're talking about in its particular situation. Yes.
So has there been research, or have you noticed changes in like that transition zone where you have like the IVA? Has that also, as these tidal or the water system changes and pushes inward, have you noticed them responding as well and moving further into the more upland areas, or?
The picture that I showed you was from a guy, Chris Elphick, who's at UConn. He's been doing a really neat stuff looking at marsh transgression. He has a number of sites around Long Island Sound. And in some areas, they see evidence of it. In other areas, not so much. And so again, it does vary by site depending on the site conditions. So a little bit more grade, not so much. If it's a little flatter, okay, you're going to see a bit more transition. Some of the areas that we're working on, again, we have sort of the dikes by due to the Amtrak, to the trolley line, the headlands, and so these are barriers to transgression, and so the water's kind of building up. But even in those areas, so for example on the trolley line, we do see things happening along the marsh edge where it's trying to transgress, but it's kind of it's kind of a different thing, because when it hits these areas that are built up, water tends to stay there, and they actually pool out. And so what you wind up getting are these tall Spartina alterniflora rather than a transgression. So you're almost getting low marsh being built up against the dike. It's really strange because you get pools of standing salt water. Yes?
Through your research and efforts already, do you think there's enough people willing to put their time, money, and resources into preventing the marshes eroding further? Well,
there are many initiatives. I mean, there are almost many of the coastal towns in Connecticut, for example, are paying attention to this. They're developing plans for sea level rise. There have been a number of initiatives to develop living shorelines, like I've talked about, in various various areas along the Connecticut shore. There are a number of demonstration projects that have been done. An area where quite a bit of this has been done is in Chesapeake Bay and in Delaware Bay as well. And it's kind of filtering up to this area. The situations are a little bit different, so because of that setting, there are different environmental constraints to do that. But yeah, there is an effort to start doing this. And many of the other things, like the changes in regulating floodgates and things like that, those have been being put in over the last couple of decades, and so there are efforts in that regard. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
What could possibly happen if we did lose the marshes?
Well, remember that ball field over there that I showed you in that aerial? That ball field would probably go. And so now the town of Stony Creek doesn't have a Little League baseball field, and all the parents and the kids are crying because they don't have a baseball field. Now they got to find another place to buy that baseball field, and the property values have gone sky high, and so now they're dealing with, where can we buy a little baseball field for the kids? So there's one example. But all those people that live around the salt marsh in Old Saybrook that I showed you, okay, now they're freaking out because they got crabs and everything else living in their lawns, and they have, some of them are going to be okay with that, but others are going to say, why can't we build seawalls? Well, if you start building seawalls, then everything really changes quite a bit, because they're actually more destructive than not. And so there could be many economic challenges as we lose more and more marsh. We'll also wind up changing the ecosystems of the coastal areas potentially as well. And so if we convert from salt marsh to intertidal flat, that's a very different habitat. And so the local food webs, or the food webs along our coast, can change quite a bit, because now there's no nursery area. There's, when these fish come in, when they feed, we didn't have time to show you the videos, but they come in, they kind of cruise through the grasses and stuff like that, because they're trying to avoid predators, these little guys. And so if that changes, then those food webs will change, and I mean, who knows? I mean, less certain kinds of fish, more of others. Yes.
Which is better for living communities, low marshes or high marshes?
For
living communities, like for where people stay?
Well, first of all, not many people live on marshes, because there's it's wet, it's muddy, and you can't. I mean, the state owns up to the mean high tide line, and so some of those occur on marshes and whatnot, and so if one was going to, sort of the safest places to live are areas that have a lot of buffer, and so if you're living, you can sit out and maybe enjoy looking at the marsh, but you're some distance away or kind of high, because down the line you may get crabs in your lawn, or a storm wiping you out, and so those would probably be the better areas. Yes.
Why are the seawalls more harmful?
Well, what happens with the seawall is that you have waves crashing against the seawall, and because of that, you're increasing the turbulence. I actually had a figure. Well, I'll explain it. And because of that turbulence, you're basically disturbing the sea floor right in front of the seawall a lot more than, say, for example, in a living shoreline. And as such, you have kind of a high dynamic, very sandy potentially area that a lot of plants aren't going to necessarily be able to attach. You may not be able to build up oysters or other kinds of shellfish in those areas, and so they tend to be very dynamic, and that kind of cuts out a group of organisms that can potentially live in that stretch of coastline. Plus, they also divert. Our oceanographer and residents could probably help me out on this, but they also change current patterns. Shoreline current patterns can actually cause more erosion along the shoreline in certain areas. So, yes.
Is there actually an overall loss of marsh, or just a change where in other words, are new marshes growing at the same rate that others are
That's a good question. There are, as I noted, there are a lot of marshes that have been lost, particularly as we move from, at least in Long Island Sound, from the Connecticut River west because of the higher tidal range. There is one area of marsh that I know is growing, and that's at the mouth of the Housatonic River. And so because the sediment supply and the way the sort of the currents are going, there's an area of marsh just in front of, is it called Milford Point? I think it's called Milford Point, right at the mouth, across from Stratford. That marsh has been growing because sediment is being deposited and so on and so forth. There may be a couple of other small areas, but pretty much to the extent that I know, it's primarily loss or change. Dr. Carlisle.
You mentioned this briefly, but could you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on the cause of the dieback?
Oh, from because of the crabs.
Yeah.
Okay, so these purple marsh crabs are herbivores, and they've been common to New England and other areas, but in New England for a long, they were always found here. But for some reason, over the last decade, their populations have grown considerably, and they've started eating these low marsh plants to the extent that I showed you, where they basically denude that. And a number of researchers think that what's happened is that because of increased primarily recreational fishing and to some extent commercial fishing, but inshore fishing, that the predators of the small crabs that would go on and eat on the marsh have been lost. And so there's been a release from predation, and so they can, so their populations have proliferated, and therefore there's just a lot of them that are eating a lot. But our own studies suggest that, well, first of all, if we look at Long Island Sound, fishing in Long Island Sound has been going on forever, right? Since the colonial times. There's been a lot of fishing since the 1800s. And this never happened in Long Island Sound until about, we have a student who's finishing up her master's thesis, Jamie Frederick, and she went through historical photos, and it really didn't start going till about 2000, where we see this expansion of bare area. Melissa Greenfield is also working on this issue, and she's kind of looking at, well, is it expanding? And then we had another student who actually looked at their activity patterns, and I just can't believe they can eat so much. And so between that and the fact that we've had a lot of fishing pressure, but their populations never really expanded up until now, suggests that something else is going on. Personally, I think it has to do with increasing water temperatures, which allows the larvae to escape predation, to grow to a larger size so they can have more successful recruitment. And so I think it's sort of in the larval cycle that's happening, and not necessarily on the predation side. Okay, well, thank you very much.